We are, I think, if in Santa Fe, we're really, really fortunate to have somebody like Russ come and be available to us in such an intimate kind of a circumstance, that we can really find a way that we can all be empowered to do the things that we need to do in our own community, as well as up from there. Russ?
Thanks, Melba. We've been finding that in general here in Santa Fe. I am really coming to realize why it is that Santa Fe is such a unique and special place. There seems to be a higher percentage of thoughtful people here than almost anywhere I've been in the country, if not in the world, and that impresses me. I live in New York City, and in fact, I was just sitting in a cafe and I heard these two men talking about the world, and the things they were talking about, I just thought it's almost like central casting of, I could almost grab any random person in Santa Fe, and if they had had advance notice, they would have come to this event or any other event that we had. So that's really exciting, and it's really encouraging. And sometimes when you're out there doing the sorts of work that we do, you don't have enough contact with people who are on the other end, who are reading what you're doing, who are reacting to it. And so it's very nice to be in a community like this where you really can get the kind of feedback. So I hope that as we proceed during the next half hour or so, I'll get a chance to hear what you think about things. I do give a lot of talks, and some of them can go on quite long. And one of the reasons for that, and I don't want to terrify you, one of the reasons for that is because once I get started, people get so drawn into the sort of what sounds like fiction, but isn't. And it's certainly entertaining, if not the sort of thing to endure right before bedtime. And so once we get going, it becomes hard to stop, but I will try to not only stop, but I'll try to give you a highly abbreviated version. I'm going to see what I can do in maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so, and then we can go to questions. Today, while I was driving, I was listening. Sometimes I like to listen to right-wing talk radio. Not that I like it, but that I think it's necessary to remind ourselves what a lot of people in this country are listening to and what is influencing their perceptions. So I was listening to this Laura Ingraham, and she was railing against the Occupy Wall Street people and describing them basically as freeloaders and sort of filthy no-goods and so forth. And you could imagine the sort of rising terror of the people who were listening to her. She really made it sound like the people with the pitchforks and the burning stakes were right at the gates of the city. And what struck me also about what she said was a variation of what we're hearing from the corporate media, which is these sort of difficulty understanding why people might think there was something wrong in this country. What is this about? In her case, she just thinks they're ungrateful wretches who have nothing better to do. The sort of traditional media keeps asking, you may have heard about this question, well, what is it you want? And I thought, well, isn't that interesting, with so many things wrong in this country that a person would have to even explain or even think about where they need to begin. It's so obvious. And the people in Egypt didn't need to explain what they wanted. They wanted a change, and they wanted the corruption out of the system. And I think that's what people want in this country. So I think that it's very important at this particular juncture to figure out what it is that's going on and what it is that we can do about it. In the last 2 nights, I had the pleasure of attending lectures by other individuals who were out talking about these kinds of things. Monday night, Juan Gonzalez of Democracy Now!, and then last night, Tariq Ali. Were any of you at either of those?
Tariq.
Okay, yeah, he was excellent. And I talked to him a little bit afterwards, and we're trying to sort of form alliances with as many kind of public intellectuals as we can, because we really want to create a movement. WhoWhatWhy is nominally a website. Some people call it a blog, although I don't believe that's the right term. Or you could call it an online newspaper. But really what we are is we're a movement for the truth. And we don't think that that we are getting the truth, and so we're trying to do something about it. Tariq Ali used the term the extreme center. And he said that what's really going on in this country is not that radicals dominate the country, not the radical right wing or anything like that, but actually people who are very much centrists. People, and he calls it the extreme center, and I like that term because in my research, trying to understand and come to grips with what has been happening in this country, I have realized that the people who really are making life so miserable for the rest of us are not people who you would even notice almost because they seem so eminently respectable. These are people who are on the boards of your art museums and your opera and of some of the biggest universities in the country. And they just seem, if you were to meet them, like the most gracious people in the world. They're very pleasant and low-key, and they dress in a comfortable, informal manner, and they so on and so forth. And these are the people who run our country. In the 5 years that I spent researching my book, Family of Secrets, I was trying to understand the George W. Bush. I was trying to understand how it could be that someone as improbable as he could become the President of the United States in the first place. And I remember that when I began looking into that, a lot of people sort of poo-pooed my quest because they thought, well, this is, we know the answers. And I said, well, what are the answers? But everybody had a different answer to offer. And so I realized there was no consensus at all on what had happened and what was and is happening to this country. But one of the things that I learned in the course of my research was that the 1%, or I should say the 1% of the 1%, because many of the finest people are folks who are quite comfortable financially, and they are out there doing good things and trying to share some of their bounty with people who are less fortunate. So I don't want to encourage some sort of unnecessary class division, because that's not really what it is. It's a certain group of people, and it's really not a very big group of people, and that group of people is able to manipulate a much larger, essentially unwitting group of people to go with them and to support the things that benefit this small group. So that really is what I discovered in my research. That is what I think informs a lot of the articles that we do at WhoWhatWhy.com. It is trying to understand the mechanisms of the crime in progress. And where I would say we are different from many other news organizations, even some of the finest news organizations that call themselves alternative or non-profit, we are a non-profit, is that we are specifically focused on the notion that the public is not getting the real story, and there's a real story there to be gotten, but it takes a lot of diligence and it takes a lot of resourcefulness and skills, and we are trying to basically build a team and train a new generation of journalists to do this sort of job that we don't see being done. And to be candid about it, we don't see it being done even by the kinds of television shows that you might like and think you're getting the real truth about the news. Most of what calls itself media now are interview shows, or they are repackagers of news from elsewhere, or they are platforms for opinion, or they're largely entertainment. In terms of actual digging, real investigative reporting of the sort you might have thought of Seymour Hersh with regard to, or earlier on in the United States, a columnist, Drew Pearson, who was a spectacular muckraking columnist in Washington. It's very, very rare today. It's almost not found at all. And most of what I consider to be investigative reporting, people who really do go in trying to find something out and dig, and a lot of my colleagues and members of the trade association that I'm a member of, they mostly operate on the local level, and they pretty much steer clear of extremely controversial material. They tend to do a kind of news you can use, consumer investigative reporting. They discover isolated cases of corruption. We caught the mayor with his hand in the till, that sort of thing. And while that reporting needs to be done, that is not the big problem in this country. And what amazes me, even when I go to these conferences, is that the vast majority of the people there, the vast majority of the presentations, and the vast majority of the awards being given are for really rather unambitious reporting. And I don't think it's any coincidence, because even that organization is funded by the largest corporate media organizations. That's the only way they can survive. And these media organizations simply have no reason to get into these kinds of subjects. They're basically just trouble. We're looking for trouble. That's what we're all about. As the saying goes, trouble is my middle name. Trouble is also George W. Bush's middle name, but it's a different kind of trouble. So in any case, just to give you a little bit of the background on how I got into the most recent phase of my life, first with my book, Family of Secrets. Basically, what I did was I just began with this question. As I began the research for Family of Secrets, I basically had literally no agenda. I wasn't going to write, it was funny, when I was working on the book, people would say to me, well, are you for or against Bush? And I just thought, gee, I hate to see things limited that way, because I was really open to the idea that I could find anything. I frankly didn't think I was going to find out that he had Albert Einstein's IQ, or that I necessarily had that much in common with him. But I was open to the idea that there were things about him that might well turn out to be more positive than I'd understood, which I found, actually. And there are some things in Family of Secrets along those lines. But basically, I was just trying to understand something. And the notion of going in as a journalist trying to understand something without an agenda was so shocking to people that they couldn't believe it. Now, it is true. Look, I'm not going to kid you. I mean, I have my own beliefs. I vote. I have opinions. But as a journalist, I have to be able to separate my general, the general shading with which I view things from my work. It's no different than a doctor when they're dealing with an emergency. They've got to kind of shut off other emotions that are flooding in there in order to do their job, and journalists have to be the same. So as I investigated George W. Bush, what really intrigued me was when I began to find out all of these things that he was getting away with personally during the course of his life. And the things he got away with were so astonishing. I thought, well, how can any mortal get away with these things? None of us could. And that meant to me that he had greater angels looking out for him. And taking a non-theological slant here, those angels had to be mortals. And the more I dug into it, the more I found out that one of those angels was his father, George H.W. Bush. And I began focusing on the father. Now, without going into a lot of the stuff about the son, you can read it. We have some copies of Family of Secrets here if you'd like to pick one up. The second half of the book is about George W., and it's mostly things you don't know about him. We also take on some things you do know about him, where we introduce new information, such as the real story of how he acquired control of the Texas Rangers baseball team, a timely story right now with the World Series. And thank you for coming on a night when you might have been watching the Texas Rangers, perhaps, winning their first World Series. So I saw that he had gotten away with skipping out on his military service. And you may remember from the 2004 election that the media dropped that story. Now, how in the world can anyone get away with that, where the media is not sufficiently interested in whether the commander-in-chief during a war is the same person who skipped out of his own military service in another war, and by the way, a war he also supported? This is the most astonishing thing imaginable. And when you consider how quick the media is to jump on certain people for fairly small transgressions, including consensual sex that really didn't have anything to do with the policies of the country at all. The fact that they didn't care seemingly about this military record situation was quite astonishing to me. And so I dug into that, and as you'll see in Family of Secrets, I have a number of chapters where I break new ground in understanding what actually went on there, and what happened to a journalist, Dan Rather, when he and his team persisted on this issue. And what that taught me, that particular episode with Dan Rather and CBS, what that taught me was there is a very, very ferocious machinery operating that will simply not brook any serious opposition. And when you mess with their people, they will come after you and they will destroy you. And there are a lot of people in this country who kind of understand this. There are a lot of radio shows and websites that traffic in what is commonly referred to as conspiracy theory. My problem, both with those shows and with the term conspiracy theory, is it sort of gives normality a fantastic aspect. It kind of makes things that are real sort of cartoonish. Mm-hmm. And I disapprove of that, and I actually believe that to some extent, well, first of all, the use of the term conspiracy theory by the corporate media is a deliberate effort to suppress discussion among the people about recurring traumas in our national life. We simply aren't able to talk about it because somebody will use that term and then suddenly the whole conversation is chilled. And I am personally, as an individual and then through WhoWhatWhy, we are trying to fight back against this. We're trying to basically discourage the use of that term and to condemn people who use it rather than discussing the merits of the material. Also, I think that those who believe that everything is the result of the calculations of a very small cabal who wear hoods or other strange regalia and all meet at some seaside resort in Europe or something like that. I also condemn that, because the fact that wealthy, powerful people get together in small groups is no more suspicious than the fact that we have gathered to talk amongst ourselves. Secret societies are another story, because this is a deliberate choice to participate in a secret agreement of some kind. And John F. Kennedy, one of the many radical things that he said before his untimely death under suspicious circumstances was that he felt that there was no place for membership in secret societies for those who would serve in public office, that this was a bad thing. And I agree with that. And I know a lot of people join secret societies. There may be people here in this room who are members of them. People join because we like to belong. We like to feel welcome and part of something. We like to feel that we have we're beneficiaries of some wisdom. We like to feel that that we're part of some kind of a smaller group, a special group, a fraternity, if you will. And I understand that. I mean, that's the same reason people join public clubs that are private but not secret. But at the same time, I think historically, if you look, for example, at Skull and Bones and some of the other clubs at the elite universities, and you look at what the people who were in them did when they went into the professional world, and you see the high percentage of people involved in decision-making in government, in intelligence organizations, captains of industry who were involved in controversial activities and what have you, it is certainly something to be looked at. And again, I don't think we should rule out discussing anything at all. So I think that's something we should discuss. So as I researched the Bush family and George W. Bush's rise, I became interested in his father, and I could see his father's fingerprints on the son's being cleared of some of these things that might have otherwise gotten him in trouble. And I then became interested in the father, and I thought, well, I'm looking at how the son became president. Why don't I also figure out how the father became president? Well, this led me to the astonishing revelation that we know almost nothing about how anybody becomes president. We do not know who these people are. And as Tariq Ali said in his talk last night, he said a lot of people supported Barack Obama because they projected what they wanted onto him. His words were rather vague. He said, yes, we can. But I don't want to paraphrase Tariq Ali, but he said something to the effect of, maybe he meant, yes, we can repress the public. He didn't say, yes, we can what, exactly. What was the other one? Something you can believe in, change you can believe in. But of course, as Mr. Ali pointed out, change you can believe in could turn out to be no change at all. That's maybe the only kind of change you could believe in. So words are just words, and we need to know much more about who it is that we put in charge. There isn't time here to go into the revelations of Family of Secrets. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of them, each of which are guaranteed to make your eyes bug out, but I'll just give you a few. As I looked at George H.W. Bush and his ability to make his son's problems go away, I discovered that the elder Bush was part of a group of people who know how to make problems go away and know how to create problems for people they want to create them for. He had been director of the CIA for a single year, and I was fascinated. As I mentioned, I'm fascinated by how all these people get to wherever they are, and I thought, well, how did he get to be CIA director and why? And so I went to the newspapers and I read them from the period, and I noticed that even back then the journalists weren't asking these questions. They weren't even curious. They just said President Ford is appointing George W. Bush. Mr. Bush was briefly a congressman and he was an ambassador to the United Nations, and that was good enough for them. But they didn't actually ask the question, why did President Ford choose this particular man for this particular position? What would he be doing, and what was the context at the time? And what I found was that the context at the time was that the CIA was under investigation at the highest levels for probably the only serious time in their history. The revelations had come out that they were doing all sorts of illegal, unethical, and dangerous things in the United States and internationally, things that really threatened our democracy itself. And at that particular moment, when the CIA would have logically needed to bring in a highly trusted person who knew the family jewels, in fact that was a term of a release of documents about the CIA, who knew about the family jewels and knew what to do and how to keep more revelations from coming out, of all the people they chose the seemingly harmless man who was sort of affable and who had really very little experience in the international arena apparently, and knew nothing about intelligence. And it just seemed strange to me, and I thought, wonder why they would do that. And so as I dug, one of my first revelations was that we had gotten the story wrong. He wasn't really a neophyte. He was not this newcomer. What he was he was an old-comer. He had been CIA already. In fact, not just that year and the year before and the year before, but 3 years and 5 years and 10 years and 15 years and 20 years. In fact, his entire adult life since he volunteered to fly a plane for the Navy in World War II was in intelligence work. And as I reconstructed his life, first early chapters of Family of Secrets, I get into the kind of work that he was doing. And you can see that the companies that he worked for and the companies that he founded they weren't real companies. Well, you could say they were sort of real companies because they did have some actual income-producing activities, but that was secondary, that they were what you would call commercial cover. They were really cover for intelligence activities because, of course, you can't do spying by announcing that you're a spy. You have to have some cover that you're doing something else. And that's what he was doing. And then I realized that his grandfather, the grandfather of George W., a man named Prescott Bush, was also involved with this. And all their family, friends, and everybody else. And now we're getting to the heart of what I mentioned earlier, and I'm just going to cut to the chase here rather than narrating the whole book. This is the 1% of the 1%. They control not just secret societies, they control our society secretly. They control the crucial levers of power. And these are people who are much more powerful than a Barack Obama or a John Edwards or even a George W. Bush. These are the people who can tell those people what to do and can make sure that if they don't do it, that bad things happen to them. Now, some people, when they hear this sort of description, they say, well, that's science fiction. How could that be? And then I remind them of history and of testimony by people from these services before the United States Congress about the role of these sorts of agencies in destabilizing governments all over the world and overthrowing democratically elected leaders, and in some cases, killing them.
Allende.
And Allende, and you can, I'm sure you can...
must be some kind of conspiracy theory.
So this gentleman makes the point that when you start talking to that, people immediately say, are you a conspiracy theorist? Well, no, the conspiracy theorists are the people who plan these operations. They are creating the theories upon which the conspiracies are carried out. All a conspiracy is it's two or more people conspiring in secret to do something that they don't want people to know they're doing. In the United States, conspiracy is not a fantasy, it's a crime. And if you're convicted, you go to jail for it. So the only case in which conspiracy involving violence and crime is legal is if you're doing it purportedly in the national security interest. And that is this giant dark spot on this country. And it is never examined by the media. Almost never. And so one of the reasons that I founded our nonprofit, nonpartisan, investigative, and analytical news site, WhoWhatWhy.com, is because we think we have to look into these things. No change is possible in this country until we begin getting the real story of the mechanics and the machinations behind the things that we do see. And just to give you a few examples, on our website, you'll see that we've been doing a lot of stories about Libya and about the Western intervention, a very polite word, you might say, the Western invasion of Libya. That was a story where we went in without an agenda. We knew that Muammar Gaddafi was monstrous on some scale, that he tortured people and killed people and acted personally sadistic and kind of crazy, like any number of leaders around the world. That wasn't really the issue. We were trying to understand why the West was so avidly supporting the uprising there when they were not so avidly supporting the uprising in Egypt, in Syria, and these other places also ruled by ruthless dictators. What was the standard there? And we wanted to know that. And as we looked into it, we started gradually connecting the dots. And that's what we do, we connect the dots. Well, I want to encourage you, because of the limited time here, to go to WhoWhatWhy.com and read these stories, go into all that. We don't claim that we have the ultimate or definitive answer, but we raise some issues. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. In the early days of the uprising, when the NATO countries began coming together and then going to the United Nations. First, they said that they were concerned about a no-fly zone so that Gaddafi could not bomb his own people. And then there was this mission creep. This is what you've got to look out for. First it was stop Gaddafi's planes from bombing, and then it was, no, we need our own planes in order to do that. And then it was, we need our own planes to degrade his ability to do any kind of damage, so we need to bomb his airfields. And then it wasn't just enough airfields, it was, well, we also have to bomb any of his surface-to-air facilities so that they can't hit our planes. And then when that wasn't enough, it was command and control centers, which by the time we were finished included the convoy which was carrying the president of that country and his family. That, loosely defined, became a command and control center. So we in this country, our media doesn't examine these things. They just repeat what the officials say, knowing in private, because, you know, I go and have drinks with some of these folks who are friends of mine, and it's interesting because you get the real story only when you're consuming alcohol with them. That's the only time. And then they say, well, I can't say this on the news. I can't. And I just saw an interview on YouTube with Dan Rather, and I was struck by how profoundly candid he was. And it said CBS Newsman Dan Rather, but then when I watched it, I realized this was an interview with BBC after he had left CBS. He couldn't do that when he was there. You know, any slight thing he did and people would jump on him. They'd say, you're biased against the Bush family by your questions. This is all deliberate. It's all deliberate. You weaken people's resolve. And so really what we want to do is we want to not only investigate what's going on in this country and in the world, but we also want to investigate information itself, how it comes to us, the role of the media, the role of disinformation, because affecting people's minds is the single most powerful weapon in any tyrant's arsenal. They always have to affect your mind. They either do it by fear, and there's different kinds of fear. There's the fear that if you, in like North Korea or in those places, if you speak out, they will do terrible things to you. Or the kind of fear that they have in this country, which is the fear of the other, the fear of some external threat, or in this case, an internal threat. These long-haired, dirty kids at Occupy Wall Street, these are dangerous people who will threaten you and your family. That is the way that the 1% of the 1% keep on top and keep everybody else from focusing on the fact that they've got the deck stacked, that they're not necessarily better capitalists than the rest of us. And by the way, I've owned businesses over the years. I'm as much as a capitalist as anyone else, but I noticed that capitalism is only for the 99%, or maybe even a smaller percent than that, where people who own small restaurants or businesses, I know Philip owns a business, you have to get out there and you've got to have the best product and the best salespeople, and you've got to compete on a level playing field, more or less, with other people who are offering similar products and services. It's tough out there. But when you are like these barons who control the railroads and so on, the ones whose descendants now are the ones giving the big bucks to elect a Bush or a Romney to office, living off their inheritances, it's not about necessarily offering the best service. It's about threatening people to get rights of way on their land. It's about having lobbyists in Washington and in state capitals who get you permission to do things, get you contracts at advantageous rates if you're these large military contractors who have no-bid situations. It's capitalism for the rest of us, and it's socialism for the 1%. That's basically the way it works. So we're very interested in understanding how they manage to do it and reporting on that every day on every kind of issue we can. And one of the reasons that I'm here in Santa Fe now talking to you is because we are a movement. We know how to do these stories. We know how to train a whole new generation of journalists. All over the country, journalism schools are turning out idealistic, hungry, energetic people who want to save the world. They want to get into journalism and do good. There are very few jobs out there. Most of them, if they're going to take a job, it's going to be with these websites that are all about the latest perturbation of choose your favorite actress posing for Playboy or something like this. That's what they're going to have to cover unless serious news outlets are able to function. And so what we are trying to do is we are trying to function as a non-profit, non-partisan, non-commercial entity with no corporations behind us. We are trying to go without any ads on the site because we think that's the way to go. But the only way we can do it is we have to appeal to the public to support us, to back what we do, both financially and also to help us reach a larger audience by spreading the word, by telling people in the new era with social media, you can do so much now without ever leaving your house. Frankly, you don't even have to leave your bed. If you've got a computer there or any kind of a mobile device, you can see things that we're doing and you can multiply your force. You can reach out to people you know and ask them to reach out, and pretty soon you've reached a huge number of people and you're starting to influence them and help them to understand how things work. Now, the reason this is so important is because even though it is depressing sometimes for us to confront the truth of the situation, it is only through confronting truth that we can begin to fix problems. It does not do us any good to understand only part of the situation. And we believe at WhoWhatWhy that much of the media that we are consuming, even the so-called alternative or progressive media or whatever, are very, very limited in their willingness to confront the deeper structural power issues. It's too discomforting, and it's too discomforting because